Yo, so I'm gonna start this video by reading something that I wrote once, and I haven't read it since. But that's what I remembered when I was thinking about and our involvement as human beings with the world around us. It's basically just like one day I was cruising around, and let's just say high on life. I just realized that when anxiety kicks in, the first thing your mind does is reference different points on your life connecting to its trigger. Reference is the detailed observation of the situation you remembered from your current self. This reference will grow the more you add attention to it or fade as you neglect it. It mainly depends on the strength of the feeling and the point of your anxiety. So far, all I'm doing is explaining what I am observing happening with myself. Naturally, controlling the situation is where we maintain focus on the reference itself before we lose track and our mind connects it to other similar feelings and different reference points, confusing our logic and overwhelming our approach. Now remember that anything is a trigger for something. A ball for when you used to play basketball or football, whatever. A friend from when you did something embarrassing. True. True indifference is when you are capable of managing those triggers. So when you remember a friend that you haven't seen, remember a couple of stories with them. Some could be bad, and others might make you feel worse, heightening the anxiety and sending more energy from your day towards it. Stronger feelings merit more space in your conscious mind. The true mastery will be when we expand our consciousness to a point where we are able to fill the two worlds in it. By two worlds, I mean the past and the present. Something triggered you to remember the past. So I imagine we get stronger within oneself, and the more we are able to incorporate in it. Because that's the thing. Ultimately, we are detached from something that happens, but it's not really incorporated in our life, allowing us to gain more precision in our approach towards different situations. Some situations are heavier and others than others. So the bigger our conscious world is, the less of these situations will shake it. By bigger, I mean the more stuff we are actually looking at, the less effect they have on us because they're smaller. Whilst if I only see my life happening a certain kind of way, or I can only reflect on my day filled with certain small repetitive patterns, then anything from the outside is kind of like, yay, shake, shake, shake. So some situations are heavier than others. So bigger our conscious world, the less of these situations will shake it. The goal there of the mind is to assess the difference between the past personality of yours and the new one. Because ultimately, when you remember something, you're not remembering it, you're remembering how you were in it. So you don't look at the same situation in your head the same way you did before. In fact, what you're doing is you're reflecting on yourself in that situation back then because you don't exist in that situation anymore. You're here, you're no longer there. Buddha once said this. Uh, or I think in Buddhism or Taoism, it was said. But no man enters the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. Because ultimately, every single minute that's passing, you're kind of like, you still look the same, you probably still act the same, but you're not the same. If the mind is the connection between you and the body, then it's only rational that the ego would be represented by the mind to the real world and the body to follow. Then your memory would serve as the reference point to your current self to engage with and study. I'm actually like very much enjoying how it's written, and it's written by me. And as I said, I was high on life. After all, we wouldn't want such a feeling again if we can help it. No? So, in this, I'm trying to explain that there's a certain existence that we relate to on this planet, which is ourselves. And what I mean existence as in like the tangible things that we tend to kind of like reflect on us, me. Who am I? I am Tariq, I am this person. But your head is thinking differently. There's the you that's making the decision, and then there's the mind that's kind of like translating this. And then there's the brain that's kind of like interacting with the body in order for it to move in accordance to your own will. So remind me to talk about this in the future as well. And I'm going to write it down. One second. Mind, intention. That's how I normally explain it, but I think I have like I need to. So you are literally like observing the world, right? So you don't exist in this world. You're just an observer. What exists in this world is the personalization through your physical self of whoever you kind of the self image that you kind of created or you kind of became attached to. And if we were to restructure this a bit, this self image is based on how you interacted with the world. All these smaller triggers that happen on a daily basis, hourly basis, minute basis, simple, like my cat playing with me has affected me. My cat scratched me has affected me. Some people grow traumas just because a dog bit them as a kid, while other people kind of like just become more active simply because they spent more time outside. I don't know, man. It's just like everyone kind of deals with stuff differently. But what does dealing mean? It means there was something that they received or they themselves created that they responded to, and that is what I'm like referring to in whatever I read right now as the actual trigger. Because if I'm just looking at the world and a sound comes that reminds me of a certain incident, whether it's a sound of wedding bells that reminds me last time I went to a wedding, or whether it reminds me of a friend of mine getting married or me wanting to get married, or whether it reminds me of like a past lover of mine or a love of mine that got married and maybe the guilt, the regret, or something that it brings with it. So each of these are a different form of receiving the trigger, but it's the same thing that triggered them. And I think that's really the reality that we share with the world. Everything kind of exists as it is, but our response to it is very much a personal one that allows us to create ourselves through it. And what I stress here is the fact that these triggers are basically connecting you to a point in your memory, in your timeline. You were born and you existed, and then you're done. And that's why I kind of think history is important because the time before you existed without you. And you basically understanding how things happened then could allow you to understand better how things could be happening now. It just opens up the potential for how you could respond to the triggers. So that connection in memory, that connection between you right now and to how basically what image you had of yourself back then, or you see now of yourself back then, because back then you didn't have the same look on your own of your own self. Right now, you're looking at yourself back then in a very much like intense, different way, which brings out the intensity of the trigger. And the idea behind it is to basically, I don't want to say incorporate, but the more conscious you are, consciously aware you are of all the triggers that happen around you, which what people call presence, right? It's like you can see what's happening, you can see what could happen, and you're either involved in making something happen or you're allowing something to happen or expecting it to happen or just like doing your thing until it happens. And the idea is that we tend to like if we're reflecting on something and it tends to be something that we don't like, it very much becomes our choice now how we allow it to process, how we allow it to kind of like how we play with it, which is literally it. Because an emotion that comes out of like a distant past is probably one that hasn't been resolved properly. And so the goal behind it is to establish yourself more as what I am right now relative to that and how that kind of contributed to now and what are the things about it that kind of like don't necessarily have to exist anymore, or at the very least, don't necessarily have to bring out the same feeling that they did back then now. I feel I went too deep on this one. But on the positive side, that opens up. I think I'll get better at explaining how my train of thought works over the next couple of videos, because now I kind of have like a few ideas of the things that I could be talking about that contribute to it. So amazing. Thank you very much for watching. As always, whoever you are, fucking love, dude. Fucking love.